We're just going to give time. Thank you for coming today to a language training for recovery advocates, that's people in recovery, family members, and friends. My name is Aaron Kacharski. I first want to acknowledge that there is a ton of stuff going on in the country right now. Seems crisis stacked on top of crisis on top of crisis. There's a lot of people hurting, a lot of people, working to find their voice and their activism. And so I just want to acknowledge that it's difficult for a lot of people right now. So I appreciate that you're here to really learn about recovery advocacy, learn a language that will help. For me personally, when I first took this training, it was a lot easier for me to talk to family members and friends about recovery. For a long time, I would talk about addiction and recovery and be like, well, that didn't really come out right. I'm sure that there's people on this training that have had that experience. So I'm with the Recovery Advocacy Project. Our whole philosophy is that, Recovery Advocacy Project is going to look very different from state to state, from community to community. In the past, I think historically, there's been a lot of like national sort of efforts that like work to come in and be like, hey, this is what everybody's working on. And it hasn't always translated to what's actually happening on the grassroots level. And so Recovery Advocacy Project in West Virginia is going to look different than Recovery Advocacy Project in Rhode Island or Texas or Mississippi or Alaska, as it should. There are different issues and barriers that people in recovery face across the country, in each state, in each one of the communities. And so Recovery Advocacy Project is really working to work with people in recovery, their family members and allies, to have your voice heard in terms of thinking like a community organizer and knowing that thinking and acting locally can work towards real change in this country. And in your state and in your community. And so the first thing that we wanted to do, each state is at a different level in terms of their organizing. West Virginia, and this is true for like every state that I've ever done advocacy work in, is that advocates fill in a lot of blanks of what's happening in, like what's missing in the state. People advocate and fill in those blanks because we care about the issues. And there's a lot of great stuff happening across our states. It's not always coordinated in terms of having the most sort of strength. And there are campaigns that unify us that, sometimes we don't always work together because there's things that, separate us as a recovery community. But there's a whole lot of things that bring us together as well. And so Recovery Advocacy Project is really working to listen to your stories, develop your stories, and work to identify some of the common barriers that people are experiencing across the state, and working to come up with solutions both on the community level and legislative level that will address those unifying issues that are happening. And so thank you for coming here today. While we're going through the training, and this is a training that is fantastic for people that are at the beginning of their advocacy journey. And also, if you've been doing activism and advocacy and speaking out for a long time, this can be a good refresher. And so I think that everybody's going to get something out of this. One thing I want to do is say that each state, we're working to identify state leads that we can work with that can help to identify some of those issues that we're talking about, and bring people in recovery, their family members and friends like yourselves, together. And I wanted to give the West Virginia State lead just a minute to introduce yourself. Joanna's with us, Joanna Vance. I know a lot of people came on the training and said, "Hi, Joanna," like you guys know her, which is good, but there's not everybody does. And so I wanted to make sure that Joanna had a minute to introduce herself.
Hey guys, my name's Joanna Vance. I'm the West Virginia State lead. I do know a lot of you. A lot of you I do not. Thank you guys for coming. We sent out the link on several different platforms, Facebook groups. Someone in the comments did say the West Virginia Leadership Academy. Yes, very familiar with them. If sorry, if any of you guys are interested in making connections, organizing through the state, you can get with me on Facebook. I'll put my email in the comments. Like I said, a lot of you know me, some of you don't. I'm a peer recovery support specialist for Synergies Health. It's out of Charleston. I'll go ahead and put my email here in the comments. But thanks everyone for coming.
All right, thank you, Joanna. Joanna is going to help to build some of these actions in the future. As we're going through the training today, we're going to be talking about language. We're going to talk about your story, and you're the only one that can tell your story. That's the great thing about this. We have some language that will help people do it in a way that doesn't feed into the negative public perception that might exist out there. It's a stigma. We know that there's a stigma for people in recovery, for people still using drugs, for family members that have been affected by addiction. There's a stigma. And this language training will help people to talk about those experiences without feeding into that negative public perception, without feeding into that stigma. And so I think for a lot of people, this is going to feel like a relief. People have taken this training, they're like, this is what I've been looking for my whole life. And then there's other people that take this training and they're like, this is weird because it's like learning a new language. That's fine. Like wherever you're at, it's good. Let this be the beginning of something for you, or a refresher for you. So just a couple technical things real quick. I'm going to share my screen. We're going to ask that people stay mute for most of the training, but there are portions of the training that we want people to discuss and ask questions. If you have questions during the training, there are raising your hand features. You can like legit raise your hand on the video and try to get our attention, but the thing is sometimes we're looking at the slides or we're limited to seeing only a few videos at one time. And so there are features that you can use on Zoom that will allow you to virtually raise your hand. And I'm going to show you how to do that really quick before we get started. Hopefully you can all see my screen right now. Can you give me, I can only see a few, but can you give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Okay. And so this is just a quick reminder about Zoom technology and raising your hands. If you're watching from a PC or a Mac, you can move the mouse to the lower portion of Zoom window and the toolbar will appear. It shows you where that is to manage participants. You click on participants and you'll see everybody that's in the room. And then participants list, you're gonna have the option to raise or lower your hand, okay? And so you can try it now just to do that, but you can unraise your hand as well. So that way we don't have 100 people raising their hands all at once. You don't have to actually click on it, just know where it is. Touching the dot, if you're using an iPhone, touching the dot at the bottom center of your device to access a pop-up menu, and raised hand will come up in that menu, all right? If you have an Android phone, you can select more from the toolbar. That's that three little dots at the bottom of your Android phone. And there's an option to raise your hand there, as well as a couple other options. And then if you're using an iPad, you can select more on the top right of the screen, and that will allow you to virtually raise your hand and we're going to work to unmute people as they kind of raise their hand in this process. I hope that that helps out. If you're audio only, if you're just calling from a mobile device, I actually didn't know this. You could just press *9 and that raises your hand. I don't really know how that works, but that'll inform us that you'd like to come off of mute and chat. And so I hope that that's helpful. Let me take it off of this PowerPoint here, and we're going to go right into the training. And so here, okay, everybody should be able to see that new presentation there. It says Recovery Advocacy Project. I do want to point out that there are a lot more language resources at recoveryvoices.com. That's the website. And what we do is we have a whole bunch of grassroots how-to manuals. You know, if you want to organize a virtual town hall meeting, or if you want to testify at a budget hearing, or if you want to learn more about the language of recovery and speaking out, there's a how-to manual for that on the website. And so there's a ton more resources for grassroots advocates to have your voice heard, and hopefully that helps and points you in the right direction of what you might want to do. And basically the idea is, you know, we want Joe Smith, advocate of, you know, West Virginia, if he wants to organize something in his community around recovery, we want to give people the power to do that and the tools to do that. That's why I kind of look at this as more of a project. It's a grassroots project that more than an organization. It's a grassroots project, right? And so we do want to do a few introductions. I mentioned my name. I'm going to reintroduce myself in a minute, but I have a handful of people. Just, you know, there's a ton of people on here, so we don't have time for everybody to unmute and kind of introduce themselves, but you can raise your hand and and Garrett will take you off mute. We just want you to just say, you know, your name, what your relationship to recovery is, and you know, so you would identify yourself as you normally would, if you're comfortable with that. Obviously, we want, you know, it's like I'm so and so, recovering addict or alcoholic, or you know, however you normally identify yourselves. Just take a minute to take, you know, 10 seconds to say, hey, my name is, and this is why I'm here. Who wants to introduce themselves? Emily Dotson raised her hand. Okay, we have a few people raising their hands. Garrett, are you gonna?
Yeah, I think because they can unmute themselves, so I'll just call out your name. So go ahead, Emily Dotson, and then unmute yourself.
Okay.
All right, can you hear me, guys?
Yep.
All right, my name's Emily Dotson. I'm from Boone County, and actually, Joanna is my peer coach. I'm a recovering opioid addict of 5 years, and I never done heroin. I was just pain pills, but Roxy's and Opanas and stuff like that, they was my weakness. And she actually, Joanna had referred me to this project group thing, because I'm actually taking the class to be a peer coach. So
Cool.
Great.
hi guys, I'm Emily. Nice to meet y'all.
Good. This there. Then just so you know, there are plenty, like hundreds, thousands of peer coaches across the country that have taken this training. Garrett, you want to call somebody next here?
It says Recovery U, so I don't know who. I know there's
Recovery U. Yep, I saw two gentlemen before.
How you guys doing? My name is Brandon Thornhill. I'm a peer support specialist at Recovery U here in St. Augustine, Charleston, and I'm a person living in long-term recovery as well. Got a couple of guys with me here from the center, and if you want me to introduce yourself real quick.
Kenny, covering addict, and I want to study to be a recovery coach / peer support specialist.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Who's next here?
Did he get me? I think they got unmuted by accident.
Oh, it's
Can you-
okay.
Can the last person go?
I'm Michael Lynch, recovering addict. I'm going to go to school for counselor also.
Great, thanks.
All right. Thank you, guys.
How about Sunny?
Hey guys, my name is Sunny. I am actually a peer recovery support specialist with the Anchor Project, and I have one of my other PRSs here, so she's going to introduce herself too.
I'm Lindsay. I work with the Anchor Project.
She's also a PRSS.
Oh, yeah.
We're happy to be here. Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Brittany?
Hi guys, I'm Brittany Pierce. I'm a peer recovery support specialist with FMRS in Beckley, West Virginia. I am a recovering addict. I used to be addicted to pain pills. So now I'm almost 2.5 years clean, and I'm happy to be here.
Michael Holmes?
Hi, everybody. My name is Mike. I'm in long-term recovery. I've been clean and sober for 10,386 days. No, I didn't write. It's 836 days. Had it backwards.
Thanks.
I'm a recovery coach at Bluefield State College, working under a grant from Southern West Virginia Collegiate Recovery Network, and I'm an employee of Southern Highlands.
All right.
And here's my wife right here next to me. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I'm Kim Holmes. I'm also a peer support specialist, and I do work for Southern Highlands Mental Health Center in Mercer County. I'm the collegiate recovery coach at Concord University, and I've been in long-term recovery since August 18th of 1990.
She has 76 more days than me. She's 13th step me.
Thanks. Charlotte, how many? There's 3 more hands raised, so we'll go with that, Aaron.
4 is out.
Okay.
Is there a
Something tells me. Yeah, go ahead. 3 more.
Charlotte?
Oh, I'm Charlotte Webb. I've been sober for 7 years, and I am a core employment specialist. CORE stands for Creating Opportunities for Recovery Employment.
Great, thanks. David?
I'm David Sanders. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I'm also the Recovery Supports Advisor for the Bureau for Behavioral Health and Health Facilities, which is the state agency in West Virginia that's responsible for the treatment, recovery, and prevention system in West Virginia.
Great, and last hand I see is Abby.
Abby Coulter, and I'm a patient advocate out of Morgantown, peer recovery specialist out of Morgantown, West Virginia. The volunteer peer support specialist at my local opioid treatment program, and I've been in long-term recovery for almost 18 years through medication-assisted treatment.
All right. Well, I appreciate you guys introducing yourself. I introduced myself as Aaron, as Recovery Advocacy Project earlier. I'm going to reintroduce myself a little bit using some of the language training that you're going to learn today. My name's Aaron Kacharski. I'm a person in long-term recovery, which means that I haven't had a drink or a drug since September 6th of 2003. And as a result, I'll be able to create the life that I want to live. I'm somebody that's connected with my family. I have a great support network, and I've been working in the recovery spaces as a recovery advocate and speaking out for more than 12 years, even though I have almost 16 years in recovery. It took me some time to find my voice and start speaking out. And so I hope that this is the beginning for a lot of us here. And so one of the exercises that we want to do real quick, and again, we want you to share. You can share through the chat box, or you can share by unmuting yourself. We'll do the same thing. If you want to share, raise your hand. We want to do a little exercise of why language matters, why the words that we use to describe people in recovery, or even people still using why that matters. So what are some of the terms or words that you usually hear with that are used to describe people with addiction or recovery, right? So you heard a couple of them, like addict and alcoholic, right? Those are two very common ones. What
Junkie.
are some other ones?
Someone said junkie.
Junkie. Yep. What else?
Crackhead.
Crackhead. Yeah, like all the head ones, like crackhead, meth head, pothead, right? They're
Fiend.
all, yeah, fiend, right? What else?
In the chat, someone wrote stain, hopeless, worthless,
Yep. I see a lot in the chat there.
druggie.
Zombie. You know, you have lush, garbage, tweaker, right? And so, and there's more. We know them. Waste of space. What else? Criminal. Piece of shit. I'll say it out loud.
Low
Untrustworthy.
life.
Disappointment. Untrustworthy. Hopeless. I'm not gonna say that one. See, that's like the commonality of like all of these phrases is they're negative, they're offensive, right? And you know, for me personally, there were moments in my life where if somebody yelled, "Hey, junkie," like I would have turned around because I would have identified that way. What happens for a lot of people in recovery is we don't associate with those words like we used to. Like we evolve as human beings, and in our recovery. And so I don't, you know, if somebody yelled out, "Hey, junkie," now, I would not think or know or react that they're talking to me, or acknowledge or react to it. Um, and so when thinking about our recovery story, know that that is very different than your addiction story. I'm sure a lot of people in here are used to kind of telling their addiction story. Like myself, you know, I've told my addiction story. A lot of the format that a lot of people use is you have the experience, strength, and hope part, right? A lot of people talk about the addiction aspect, um, which, if you think about it, the addiction stories are the ones that are out there already, right? If you you know, read an article or watch the news, the consequences of untreated addiction, that's the story that already exists. And so if addiction is the problem, then how do we talk about recovery as a solution, right? And so for those of you who might be um, used to telling your story, experience, strength, and hope, think about it like, well, what if I just started with the hope part and moved forward from there? What does that story sound like? You know, what is my life today as a person in recovery, or what is it like working with people in recovery as a peer support specialist? Why do you do it? Why is it necessary? If you're a family member, maybe you lost somebody, or maybe you're a family member that has somebody in recovery in the family, this training will help you too. So I just want to make sure I put that out there, that this training is all about perception, how other people perceive the words that we're using to describe our community, to describe our recovery, to describe ourselves. We might think that we're using, when we're speaking out, we're using language that helps our cause. But a lot of times we have to recognize that how other people hear those words are different than how we intended it to be. People in recovery, we have our own language with one another, right? Like if somebody says to me, I'm so and so and I'm an addict, or I'm so and so, I'm an alcoholic, like there's a bond. I have a bond with that person. I know what that means, right? If you say you're an addict or an alcoholic to somebody that's not in recovery, that doesn't understand addiction, the way that they perceive that and the way that they perceive you is different. And so that's exactly what this training's about. The last thing I want to say before we get right into the training is that this is not intended for to change the way that you might speak in your mutual support group or how you normally identify in your mutual support group. That's really important. This is more about, speaking out publicly or having conversations about recovery with family and friends, or some people might do media work. It's important to know that there's a difference between your own personal recovery and what a public recovery story can look like. Those are two different things for me. I have things that are for my own personal recovery, and then I speak out as a recovery advocate using this language, because recovery advocacy is not for me. Recovery advocacy is for people that I'm never going to meet. If you can pass a law that helps somebody, or help create a recovery community center, or a collegiate recovery program, or recovery high school in your state, or you want to advocate for more peer-to-peer services, recovery coaching. That's where that stuff didn't just come out of nowhere. My cat agrees with me. She says that didn't come out of nowhere. Those are things that needed to be advocated for. And so think about your message and the voice that you want to develop. Think about your story, because at the end of this workshop, I'm going to ask you to use some of the language and say, hi, my name is this person, and these are the issues that are affecting me in recovery. This is what I want to advocate for. This is why I'm a recovery advocate, or you tell that recovery story. All right. And then the last thing I want to say is that this training was developed by an organization called Faces and Voices of Recovery, and it's been adapted a number of times. And they've done an amazing job with this training as a launching point. It's been used by other advocates and trainers and organizations to continue to teach thousands of people across the country some of this language that you're going to learn. All right, I'm going to go to my next slide here. I'm stuck. Hold on. Give me 1 second. Okay. So some of the training goals is to learn about messaging, learn how to tell your recovery story to families and friends, learning how to use recovery messages in different aspects of your life, including representing, you might belong to an organization or a network. Some of you might be comfortable with doing media. Other people not. That's cool. It's all up to you. Of when you feel like you want to disclose and how you want to disclose, that's your right as a person in recovery. And we want to prepare you for using messaging in your community and public policy engagement. That means, if you want to get involved with advocacy, if you want to get involved with advocating for different laws that will help people in recovery, family members and friends, that's what public policy means. Legislative sort of work. Some people are into that. Some people can't stand it. But if you're into that, we'd totally like to help you along in that path. And so some of the reasons why people speak out and do recovery advocacy, we listed a couple of them here. You want to expand opportunities for recovery. We talked about that. Peer-to-peer services, recovery coaching, peer recovery community centers. Mobilize and organize the recovery communities to advocate for rights and needs. A lot of people don't even realize that you have rights as a person in recovery. You have rights as a human being. As somebody seeking health services, you have rights. somebody who is, fighting with an insurance company, you have rights. These are all things that you have rights, and there are discriminatory barriers that are in the way of some of that. And so how do you break some of that down? Build a think and act locally recovery advocacy movement. That is really what Recovery Advocacy Project is about, on the state level, on the community level. The idea is, we don't want to tell you what to work on. We want to help you raise your voice on the issues that you care about in your communities, and achieve a just response to addiction as a health crisis. And that's what it is. I mentioned at the beginning of this training that it seems like right now there's a crisis stacked on top of a crisis on top of a crisis on top of a crisis, and it can be overwhelming. But if you want to focus and on the addiction crisis, this is something that will help you. And so when I say recovery community, it would be pretty lonely if it was just people in recovery. That's not what I mean when I say recovery community. When I say recovery community, and throughout the training, we're talking about people in recovery from alcohol and other drugs, their family members, allies, friends, supporters, right? And that's a lot of people, because it's not like, people with cancer or people with MS are the only ones speaking out, or people with HIV/AIDS are the only ones speaking out around those illnesses. It's their supporters, it's their allies, it's their family members, and it's them. And so there are allies out there that you can engage and use this language training to kind of bring on board this recovery advocacy movement. We think that's going to help here. One thing that's important to remember while we're going through the training today is that there's a lot of different ways that people get well. This is not a training that is like advocating for like one specific pathway to recovery. There is a pathway that I personally took. That was my pathway. But then I met a lot of other people, like hundreds, thousands of people that got well in different ways. And one of the things that I had to look at for me personally, I already know there's a stigma out there. I had to look at, like, if I had any biases or if I had any sort of stigma with pathways that were different than my own. That was something that I personally had to look at. And so I share that with you because maybe you have some of those biases, and I want to say that's okay. It's important to kind of look at that, because I had biases against faith-based at one point. I had biases against medication-assisted recovery, because that wasn't my pathway. And I didn't understand the experience of somebody in that pathway. And so one of the things that I kind of had to do as an advocate was really kind of look at that and challenge myself. And so I'm challenging people to look at that within themselves. Part of change is looking at inequalities and biases that we might have in ourselves. Like there are, look at that second one there, like professional treatment, right? Like I never spent one day in treatment in my life, but yet I'm 16 years in recovery. That doesn't mean that I don't think that treatment doesn't work. I have to acknowledge that treatment has worked for other people. It wasn't part of my story, but it's part of somebody's story in here, right? So making sure that we acknowledge that, I've met plenty of people that found recovery through treatment, through faith-based programs, through harm reduction programs, through drug court, through mutual support groups, whether that is an anonymous group or not, or like there's groups like Smart Recovery and all these sort of mutual support groups. So when I say mutual support, that's what I'm talking about, peer sort of groups like that. All right. And there's more than that. There's more listed than just the ones on slide. But I want to make sure that that's put out there, because we might go back to that later on in the training. I don't know if too many people have heard of Bill White. If you have, that's great. WilliamWhitePapers.org or .com. I can never remember if it's .org or .com. You can try them both. But WilliamWhitePapers.com has basically a paper on anything recovery related, like the history of recovery advocacy. It has a lot of recovery things on recovery coaching, recovery community centers, the recovery advocacy movement. So if you're interested in diving deeper, I suggest you go over there. He talks about this message of hope, and he says, but he's a recovery historian, really. He's wrote a number of books. If you want to read more of his books, there's a book called Let's Go Make Some History, and there's another one called Slaying the Dragon. They're both great reads. And so the message of hope, the quote here says, many of us have carried a message of hope on a one-on-one basis. And what he's talking about here is that, peer support, or a sponsor, or like one alcoholic helping another alcoholic, or a sponsor helping a sponsee, or a clinician helping somebody that's struggling. He says many of us have carried a message of hope on a one-on-one basis. This new recovery movement calls on us to carry that message of hope to whole communities and whole culture. It's time we step forward to shape this history with our stories, our time, and our talents. And so what Bill White is challenging us here to do is he's challenging us. That's what it is, what he's doing. He's challenging us to find that voice and bring that message of hope to entire communities and change culture with it, right? The culture of speaking out in recovery. The culture of recovery being okay. If I walk down the street, I'm going to see the liquor store, but like, where's the recovery community center across the street? Where is the peer services across the street, right? Like, until recovery is just as accepted as like addiction and alcoholism has been in this country, then we have to keep working. All right. I'm going to stop here just because I want to see some of I want to check the chat box.
I'm getting the link for the t-shirts. That's what people's wanting to know. The Stand Up for Recovery t-shirts.
All right. All good. And then I wanted to put one more quote from Bill White. He wrote a paper called Rhetoric of Recovery Advocacy. And he says, by claiming the right to speak publicly and to frame their experiences in their own language. Sorry, I'm just moving my chat box here. Oops, I have to go back. Recovering people are politicizing, in the best sense of the term, what up until now have been their own private experiences. And so that's a big deal to make that decision. But I'll share that I was quiet about my addiction and recovery for the first 3 or 4 years I was in recovery. And then I took this training, and I really kind of understood that it's okay for people to speak out about these issues. And when you really think about it, the silence around addiction and recovery and that stigma is there because of that silence, right? Because our experiences are misunderstood. And sometimes when we try to talk about those experiences, we use language that was confusing to people. And so we have to own a part of the stigma too, because we were quiet for a very long time as a community. Okay. So what's a message? Really, it's an exchange of information using words. It's the most important thing that you want your listener to hear. I was working with somebody on their recovery story yesterday, and I was just like, well, you might want to share everything you care about, but maybe your message gets lost in that. So what is the main things that you want the listener to hear or the audience to hear from your recovery story? So start thinking about those things right now. Maybe you went back to school, maybe you found sustained employment, maybe you've mended relationships in your family, maybe you're speaking out for the first time. Um, these are all things that are positive that happen as a result of recovery, all right, and a result of recovery advocacy. So it's crucial that you want to know what you want to say and leave in people's minds. You want to be able to practice this. And that's what I mean by let this be the beginning of something. I'm going to skip that part. There's a video that's just not going to come clear through this training on a digital space like this, so we have to skip it. But one thing that's important, Faces and Voices did the background on this. This training is grounded in research. It's not like somebody was like sitting behind a desk and like just came up with it out of thin air. They asked people in recovery, they asked supporters of recovery, and they asked the general public. And so they had these different focus groups, and they tested out words like survivor. And it turned out like a lot of people weren't comfortable saying, oh, I'm an addiction survivor. You know, like it just didn't come out right. And so the language that I'm going to present to you, you know, went through that process of testing different language. And some of the things that they found in that research, when they talked to the recovery community, they found that 88% believe it's very important for the American public to see that thousands get well every year. And the reason why that's important is like there's this myth out there that everybody wants to remain anonymous and everybody wants to be silent. And that is just not true. There are reasons why people are anonymous and why that's a respected tradition in some people's recovery, in some people's mutual support groups. That's very important. But anonymity is very misunderstood. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. And so that first sort of stat right there just kind of busts that myth that we all want to be quiet about this. That's just not true. Most people want people to really respond to addiction and recovery issues. And so some of the research when talking to the general public, they found that a majority of Americans, and it's probably even more now, this was done a little while ago, have been affected by addiction. I am sure that that number is much larger today. And they found a majority believe that there's a stigma towards people in recovery. So that's good news. Like there's allies that we can work with, people that understand that there's a stigma. And they found a majority say that attitudes and policies must change. That is amazing. That's good news for us as a community, that there are more allies out there for us to engage. Okay. Just thinking about some of the goals while you're thinking about your story, you want it to be a effective and credible language that you can use to talk about your life and experience, right? There's nothing more credible than you. You're the expert on your recovery story, right? You want to know how to use the message in different situations. I change how I speak if I'm talking to a group of students, as opposed to if I'm in a room full of like a chiefs of police association. Like I'll have some common things about my story that come out, and I'll use this language throughout, but I kind of tweak it depending on who I'm talking to, and that's okay. And the idea is to like not sound like, for all of us to sound like a bunch of robots. It's not about that. It's about having some common sort of phrasing and messaging to go along with your unique story. That's what makes all the stories different, is you have a story that I can't tell, I have a story that you can't tell, vice versa. And that's the beautiful thing about telling our stories, right? And shaping it. You want to make it possible for more people to get well, right? And so you want to think about, when you're thinking about your recovery advocacy story, your recovery story, like why are you speaking out? Why is it important that more people get well? What can you say that will inspire other people to find recovery, right? Think about those things. We all have the answer to that, okay? Share about why you're speaking out in recovery. We covered that. This has been adapted, you know, for like young people in recovery, for people using medication in recovery, for family members, for people that still use drugs. There has been different adaptations of this training. We can't focus on all of that today because normally this is like a 6-hour training. We don't have 6 hours. We're doing it in like an hour and a half. Okay. And so like a little over an hour. And so I just want to say there's other resources that you can look up that I'll give you at the end of the training. You want to speak with one voice. You want to make it personal. That adds credibility and breaks down misperceptions. Talk about your recovery, not your addiction. That's really important, especially if you're doing like a media interview or something. Like they're gonna want you to talk about your recovery, and that's not why you're there. You're there to talk about. I mean, they're gonna want you to talk about addiction, and you want to talk about recovery. So how do you get back to the topic of recovery? That sort of stuff's really important. I'm gonna give you some tricks for that. There's a resource called Advocacy with Anonymity that if you just Google it, you will find it. There's like PDFs you can find right off the internet of this pamphlet. You might have also seen them around if you go to recovery community centers. It talks about anonymity. The messages in this training, they don't violate the traditions of anybody's 12-step fellowship, and that's really important. It's important to respect people's personal anonymity, but this messaging that you're going to learn doesn't violate any of those traditions that are important to a lot of people. And you can also use this pamphlet to help educate others in 12-step groups about their right to speak out. And so that's a fantastic resource that was developed some time ago. It's also available in Spanish as well. And so it's important that those are out in our communities, and it'll really help you. Let's look at a couple of the traditions that deal with anonymity real quick. Tradition 6, 10, and 11. Those are ones that really mention anonymity in some capacity. It says a 12-step group ought never endorse, finance, or lend the 12-step by name. That's really important. Remember, we're not saying, I'm a person that is advocating on behalf of this anonymous group. That is not what we're doing. Okay. You're not there to get more members of an anonymous group or anything like that. You're not there to represent AA or NA or any of the A's. That is not their style. And that's important for us to respect and recognize and acknowledge. The 12-step group has no opinion on outside issues. That is true. I don't know about people in here, but I got a ton of opinions on outside issues. All right. And so as an individual, you have opinions on outside issues. The 12-step group as a whole does not. That's really important right here. The 12-step group ought never be drawn into public controversy. Very important. So, and then it's 11 there, our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need to always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. That's very, very important. So that's talking about the 12-step group as a whole, their policy. And so what that means, I want everybody to read the bottom there of the screen. So this means that you can speak out about your own recovery and advocate for the rights of others as long as you don't involve the 12-step group by name. It's that simple. It's really important to recognize that. And again, go back to that the many pathways slide. Remember, we're talking about recovery as a whole. We're not talking about a single pathway, right? There's a lot of ways that people get well. So when we say recovery, we're talking about all of that. Okay. This is the meat and potatoes, all right, of this whole training. You heard some people when they introduced themselves. Oh, let me go back for a minute. So everybody should have a piece of paper and a pen. And most of you got the worksheet that we sent out yesterday. It looks like this. I'll show it real quick. If you don't have it, that's okay. You can use the slide as a guide. But you really want to let this be like a first draft of your recovery story. You can use the worksheet there to kind of guide your recovery story. I'm going to go over some phrases later of some words we do use and words we shouldn't use anymore, but try to focus on this as a person in recovery. And so If you're a family member in recovery, it'll change a little bit. If you're a supporter or an ally of recovery, you can just say that, I'm a supporter of long-term recovery, which means this, right? So you're just going to tweak some of the language that you see on the slide here. But we're going to give people 5 to 10 minutes to write that first draft. But let me go over this slide first. Don't start writing yet. But you should have a pen and paper handy. I'll give people a minute to do that. And so when I introduce myself at the beginning, right? If I would have said, my name's Aaron, I'm an addict, like you might know what that means as a person in recovery. That's fine. But if I, go to my mayor or go to a legislator or talk to a family member and I say I'm Aaron, I'm an addict, or I'm Aaron, an alcoholic, their perception is that they think I'm still using drugs and drinking alcohol. I've even been out places where, I say to somebody, I don't drink, I'm an alcoholic, and they're like, oh, that means that you love alcohol, so let me buy you a drink, right? Like it's very it's misunderstood, right? And again, this is about perception. And so I want people to look at that first phrase. This is what I used at the beginning to introduce myself. I'm in long-term recovery. I said my name's Aaron Kacharski. I'm a person in long-term recovery. A lot of people, they might say I'm a mom in long-term recovery, or I'm a sister in long-term recovery. I'm a woman in long-term recovery. It's really up to you. Tweak this, make it your own. And long-term recovery is defined by the person using the language. And that's really, really important. I think a lot of us, we're told what long-term recovery was. Like, oh, you got to have 20 years before you can say you're in long-term recovery. That's a bunch of hogwash, all right? It's about the person that's using the language. It's about you using the language. If you don't feel like you're in long-term recovery, say you have like a month or 5 months or something like that, and if you don't feel like you have long-term recovery, that's okay. Like tweak the language. You can say, I'm a person in recovery, which means, or I'm looking forward to being in long-term recovery, and for me means this, right? There's different ways you can play around with this language. Long-term is up to the person to describe what that is, right? It's about the messenger. Think about that. Just keep that front and center. And who am I to judge whether somebody is in long-term recovery or not? Who am I to do that? It's about the messenger, the person that's delivering the message. When I first took this training, I was 3 years in recovery, and my trainer had 3 years and 6 months. And I heard my trainer use this language, and I was like, oh, that means in 6 months I'll be in long-term recovery. And I was like totally missing the whole point. Like that was not what it's about. It's about each person being comfortable with how you delivered the message. And so you not only want, and so look at that first line there, so the way that I say it is, I'm Aaron Kacharski. I'm a person in long-term recovery, which means that I haven't used a drink or a drug since September 6th of 2003. I put my date there. I don't say years. I don't say months. If you're cooler with saying the days like that gentleman did, he had 10,836 days. Cool, man, do it. That's your story. I think that's impressive. And so, think about, so you want to not only explain what long-term means to you, but you want to explain what recovery means to you, right? Recovery for me is I haven't used alcohol or drugs. Recovery for other people is, they haven't used alcohol and haven't placed a bet, right? And so you want to personalize it with what you're in recovery from. And other people, and remember, it's about perception, right? Like if I say I'm in recovery and people don't know that's associated with addiction, they're like, what did you get a surgery? Or, is it like are recovering from like knee surgery or something? No, I'm in recovery from alcohol and other drugs. All right. And so so you have to kind of explain that part to people. And so these next three sort of bullet points there are meant to like propel your story forward. You know, you can say something like long-term recovery has given me new hope and stability. Okay, great. But what does that look like? Like, how has it given you new hope and stability? Did you go back to school? Are you employed and helping other people? Do you volunteer in your community? You know, what are some of the positive things in your life that you have today as a result of recovery, or working with people in recovery, or being a family member in recovery? What are some of those things? And so this is where all of our stories are going to differ. That next line, I've been able to create a better life for myself, for my family and my community. Okay, great, but how? Like, what does that look like? Like, tell us what that looks like. Um, and the last one is my favorite one there. I'm speaking out so that others have the opportunity to achieve long-term recovery. You know, let people know why you're willing to speak out publicly about recovery, and like let that answer come out. You know, that's going to be a really unique thing for everybody's story in here. You know, what inspires you about talking about recovery? What are you passionate about that you can share with other people? And so I want to give people 5 to 10 minutes. I am going to go to this next slide real quick, because for family members that might be on today, it's very similar. You know, if you have a family member in recovery, you can say, you know, my family member hasn't used alcohol or drugs. Or if you're comfortable saying my son, my daughter, if you're a family of loss, you can shape this story around that story as well. You know, I want to make it like, especially that last line there, I want to make it possible for others to find recovery. As somebody who lost somebody to addiction, I've lost my best friend in 2008 through an addiction. It's a part of why I speak out. And so it's important that I share that with people. All right, so let me go back to that slide. I want to give people 5 to 10 minutes. You can ask questions in the chat box, or you can take yourself off mute, but just make sure there's not like 20 people doing it at once. If you have a question that's directly just to me in the chat, you can direct chat me, and I can go back and forth and help you with your story. If you have a question, if you don't want to say it out loud, like, that's fine too. So let's give people some time here. Everybody can see that screen. Just use that screen for about 5 to 10 minutes, and start writing out your story. Remember, it's the recovery story, not the addiction story. Okay? Use those bullet points there to really give people examples of what recovery is like today and how that can help other people. I'm going to go to the chat here just to see if right. So if your addiction, there's overeating or engaging in compulsive eating, right? So for some people, addiction is, you know, not betting anymore, not gambling anymore, or eating, right? Can you speak to those? There's a question. Can you speak to those with mental health and addiction stuff? Yep. And so if mental health is and mental illness is a part of your story, put it in here. I think that that's a story that needs to be told more. In your experiences, that the stigma and experiences that people with mental illness face is very similar to people struggling in recovery. And so if that's part of your story, absolutely, it's important to be an advocate there as well. It's a story that needs to be told.
Aaron, I've heard that addressed as I'm a person with lived experience.
Go for it. Yeah, lived experience. It's on another slide a little later. It's a great phrase to use. I'll have a couple other pointers moving forward too, but I just want to make sure that this is just a very much a first draft here. And know that your story is going to change over time, right? And so don't feel like you're like doing this wrong. Oops. Hold on. People can still see the slide, right? Okay. Sometimes I open the chat box. I'm not sure if everybody can see the chat box. If anybody has any questions, just shoot me a message in the chat. You can do it privately, or if you want the whole group to see it, that's fine too. Somebody had asked, how long do you want the rough draft? It's like, you know, I think the best version to start off with, like, if you were to talk to somebody for like a minute about why recovery is important to you, it's like, that's like a paragraph or two. I think that's a real good start. You know, just if, you know, 3 or 4 sentences is cool. It doesn't have to be like a whole speech or anything. Just get yourself started with the main things that you want the listener to hear. Remember, and so if you pick 1 or 2 things that you really want people to hear, what does that sound like? And for me, like, think about how you learn as an individual. You know, some of us learn by like practicing out loud. So you can find a peer, you can find somebody else in recovery and say, hey, I want to practice my story, and just go for it, right? And some of us learn better by writing. And so just keep writing this stuff out. A good place that I practice this language is if you go to uh, any article on addiction online, and then you like read the comment section, like especially if it's like people can be anonymous in the comment section, it's like the stigma is alive and well, like all over the place. And so you can combat that a little bit by talking about your lived experience, about giving people another side of the addiction narrative that's out there, right? Yes, just an introduction. Yep. Um, and then if there's anybody that is ready to share what they wrote, I want to give people a few minutes. You can raise your hands and we'll call on you. Brittany has raised her hand. So keep working on your stories as people are sharing here. Brittany, go ahead. Share
Okay.
what you wrote as your recovery story.
Okay, I put, I'm Brittany Pierce. I'm a person in long-term recovery, which means that I have been free from my hurts, habits, and hang-ups for more than 2 years. I am committed to recovery because it has given me and my family new purpose and hope for the future, while helping me gain stability in my own life. I'm a peer recovery support specialist and female facilitator for Celebrate Recovery. I am now speaking out because this new way of life has helped me change my life for the better, and I want to show my friends and people in my community that recovery is possible.
Whoa, you like whipped that up in a minute? That's amazing. That's great. What do people like about Brittany's share? What do people hear there that they liked?
It was all positive and motivational and inspiring.
Yep, the positiveness is like a key factor of all this. Oh, Brittany, you want to speak again? You want to answer your own question?
Well, I seen a video about sharing that I'm a person in long-term recovery, and I really liked the idea and the concept behind it. And I liked the idea because for my own recovery, drugs were just a symptom of my problem. So with Celebrate Recovery, we celebrate any recovery from any hurts, habits, or hangups. So I thought I'd add that in there too because I really like that as well.
Somebody requested that you share your story a little bit slower. Can you do yours? Can you read it again?
Sure. I'm Brittany Pierce. I'm a person in long-term recovery, which means that I have been free from my hurts, habits, and hangups for more than 2 years. I'm committed to recovery because it has given me and my family new purpose and hope for the future, while helping me gain stability in my own life. I am a peer recovery support specialist and female facilitator for Celebrate Recovery. I am now speaking out because this new way of life has helped me change my life for the better, and I want to show my friends and people in my community that recovery is possible.
I like that you use your full name too.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You got the guys at
there's-
Recovery U raising their hand.
All right, Recovery U, you're on. Like it's a live radio show or something. Go ahead.
I said, my name is Brandon Thornhill, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. What that means to me is that I no longer need to drink or drug in my day-to-day life. I've been able to repair and improve my life and my relationships through sobriety, and I'm sharing my strength, experience, and hope so that others may see the change and growth are possible through working in an honest program. A year ago, I was homeless, sick, and facing my fourth conviction. Today, I work in recovery and have a beautiful family and home. Today, I'm free, healthy, and happy.
I love it. I like how you had like a flash of what it used to be like real quick, but then you like turned it right into what it's like today in recovery. And I think that's important. Sometimes you can give people like a little glimmer of what it was like, but like as long as you pivot back onto that hope piece and that recovery piece, that was great. Well done. Is there anybody else at Recovery U that wanted to share theirs? I know there's a few of you on the call there.
Yeah, said, hey, my name is Kenny Matthews. I'm an ex-convict, drug dealer in recovery from drugs, alcohol, and just living a messed up life. I've been clean and on the straight path for a little bit over 409 days. I'm no longer afraid of going to prison or relapsing because of my recovery. I've become the father, son, brother, uncle, and community member that I was supposed to. I'm lending my voice to the hundreds of thousands of people that feel like it's hopeless or that they can't do right in their own eyes. I'm speaking for the people that behind bars, whether it's mentally, physically, or through addiction.
That's I absolutely love how you ended that and brought that all together. I think that's amazing. One of the things that is important to remember, and I think that you did a really good job of touching on this, is that recovery advocacy is not just advocating for like us. It's like people that have not historically like had a voice, right? You think about populations that are still currently at bars, behind bars. They're not like they're not having, that's not the loudest voice, right, to be heard. And so working to make sure that we're acknowledging that and working to share why we're telling our stories like that. That's important. I love that. I love how you brought that together. A lot of good feedback coming in. The timeline is great. Sunny, did you have your hand raised before? I think.
Well, whenever she had presented hers, what I was going to say was I love the fact that she started out by saying, you know, that she was in long-term recovery and said how long that it was. And then she went into saying that she now has a career in it because, you know, for a lot of recovering addicts that are in a facility, they always say that they want to help people, but I think a lot of people don't think that that's a possibility, and it truly is, because for me, I have a little over 4 years, and I remember being in a facility and saying how much I wanted to help somebody, and never in a million years did I think I would be in the position that I'm in now.
Yeah.
So that gives a lot of people hope.
Yeah, that's the cool thing about telling your story, is that, you know, you never know who's going to like hear it that day and have it be like a game changer for them, you know, in their own personal recovery or their professional development. And it's like, even if you tell your recovery story to a whole auditorium of like seniors and like 2 kids get something from it, that's all good, you know, and you'll never know that, right? That's the cool thing about this. And so again, we don't do it to kind of, and a lot of people, it feels weird talking about some of the positive stuff in our lives, because for a lot of us in recovery, we're taught to be humble, right? And so sometimes when we tell our recovery stories, they kind of like feel like bragging. And that's the weird part about this. But please remember that you're sharing those positives to inspire others, not to like brag about the stuff that you have, right? It's about giving people a visual of like what life could be like if they maintain their recovery, or if they get into recovery. All right. Okay. One more person want to share? And then I'll just finish the rest of the training here. One more person. Who is it? Hold on. I'm looking at, does one more person want to share their recovery story? If not, we can go forward, but I think there's one more that wants to do it. I got a hunch. Who's gonna do it? All right. We're moving on. And so, practice that. Let that be a first draft. I want to go over, let me close my chat box here. We did this. Hold on, sorry, I just got to get my, there we go. Here's another Bill White quote that I like to put out there. Words have immense power to wound or heal. The right words catalyze personal transformation and offer invitations to citizenship and community service. The wrong words stigmatize and disempower. We're going to talk about some of those wrong words. And, they're not wrong when we're talking to one another, for example. Like when I say addict to either one of you, it's like, you know what that is. But again, it's about perception. Bring that out, right? And even I want to point out somebody used the word clean when they were sharing their story. And to a lot of us, we use that word all the time, right? And I understand what that means when somebody says I've been clean for 5 years or 5 months or whatever. But think about how, like, what's the opposite of clean, right? When people kind of look at, it's like, so that means that, like, if you're not in recovery, does that mean like you're dirty, right? Like that's the kind of mentality that a lot of people have. And so we just want to make sure that even some of the words that we've been saying and phrases that we've been saying to one another for a long time, we have to kind of check ourselves to say, how will other people hear that word? How are other people hearing how I'm talking about my recovery? Okay, and it's tricky, but let's look at some of this. Words and concepts we need to abandon. The first one that's on that list is abuse. I'm sure a lot of you noticed that, like, a lot of nonprofits, it used to be, drug abuse coalition or drug abuse this, and they changed their name to like drug use or drug dependence or recovery something. And there's a reason for that, is because when people hear the word abuse, it immediately has a negative connotation. It's when you think about domestic abuse, physical violence, like that, sexual abuse, like it's like there's other sort of words that are associated the second somebody hears abuse. And so and they're all negative. And so trying to say, not saying like, oh, I was a drug abuser, right? Or drug abuse, like those are like that doesn't help how somebody hears your story. All right, so if you had that in your story, try to tweak it a little bit. And then the next one is self-help. The reason why self-help isn't in like the language training is because it's not about self, right? Like we recovered and healed with networks and community. It's not about like self, right? And so making sure that we limit that term in our stories. Addicts and alcoholics. All right, again, when the general public hears the word addict and alcoholic, they think you're still drinking. They think that you're still using drugs. And for a lot of us, that is not the case. And so it's important to kind of make sure that we're not saying, if you say, I'm Aaron, I'm a drug addict. Well, it sounds better if you're like, say, hey, I'm Aaron, I'm a person in recovery, or I'm looking forward to long-term recovery, a person long-term recovery, like go right into the recovery piece. The language of self-pity, that means like the poor me sort of stuff. Like it ain't about you. All right, it's about inspiring other people. All right, that's what this is about. Words and concepts we need to discuss and debate. One of the ones I wanted to add on here that is that word clean. because people think about the opposite of that. They think it's dirty. Like, I don't look at people that are struggling with a health condition like addiction, and I don't look at that person and be like, oh, that person's dirty. You know what I mean? So like when people say I'm clean, like I get that as a person in recovery. But when we use it in our advocacy efforts, people absolutely hear that differently, and they don't know what that means. Think if you happen to be in like 12-step fellowships, and you might have the different slogans and the phrases, like be mindful if that stuff's in your story, because think about how long it took us to understand, like, keep it simple or one day at a time. Like, those are common ones that are important and useful for us in recovery, but a lot of people have no idea what we're talking about when I'm like, yeah, keep it simple, stupid. Like, the general public doesn't know what we're talking about, or easy does it. It's like they don't understand that language like we do. Like, think about, like, I had to be it's like, how many times did I have to hear that to really understand like what that phrase even means to me, right? Until I really got it. And so we can't use that same language that we use in that you might use in the rooms and expect people to understand what you're going through, because it's like a foreign language to them. Yep. Treatment works. Now here's a phrase. Treatment works is important right here, because I know people that treatment worked for them. And so there's a difference between saying treatment works and treatment worked for me, right? Because if you're going and telling your recovery story and you say, yeah, treatment works, and there's some kid in there that's been in and out of rehab 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, they're not going to listen to you. They're going to be like, no, it doesn't, right? They're already going to dismiss everything that you have to say. But if you say something, if you personalize it and make it credible and say, treatment work for me, that's a part of my story, that's a whole nother thing. All right. I see it's the chat box firing up, so I just want to pause real quick. Oh, let me go back. Chat box. I've been using the word abstinent, but it's not very recovery focused. This is a great point. I don't like it, but it is non-stigmatizing. It depends. Since alcohol was my DOC, drug choice, I usually use the word sober. Sober is actually a tricky one too, and let me explain that. There are like normal people that think sober means you just stop drinking for a couple days. They're like, oh, I'm going to be sober this weekend. Like, and so think about that in the capacity of like, if we say, oh, I'm sober, they might think you're just not drinking that week, or you're not drinking that weekend when you say that. And so even that word is like misunderstood, although we're so used to saying it, right? And so again, just think about, like, if I use the word sober or abstinent, how are other people hearing that, right? That's all that we're saying here. Somebody asked, could also say a person who suffered with substance use disorder, right? And so one thing that I put out there is, like, if you're a clinician and you work in the recovery treatment space, you're probably used to saying substance use disorder. That's fine if you're a clinician. For a person in recovery, that's like a little too like medically for me. You know what I mean? It's just like, I don't need to be diagnosed. I know I'm a person in recovery. I don't need to like be like technically. I've never personally been diagnosed with a substance use disorder, but I know I had a problem with the drugs and alcohol. All right, and so it is tricky. It's like, yes, you can use that phrase. You can say a person who suffered with substance use disorder in some capacities, right? And some people will understand that. So depending on who you're talking to. Let's go back to this list here. Thank you guys for putting stuff in the chat box. The word consumer has always like bugged me. A lot of single state agencies use this word. When I think about somebody in recovery, or when I hear the word consumer, I think about people like sucking up the system or like buying something, right? And in my experience, people in recovery that like maintain recovery, they have this cornerstone of giving back, of helping others, of improving their, wanting to improve their community, get back into civic engagement, you know, go out and vote, go out and volunteer. I know people in recovery like that. And so when I hear the word consumer, it drives me like it's off. It doesn't sit well. And so if your state agencies or your agency that you work for uses that word, it's important to have a conversation about it. So the words stigma, enable, and relapse, you can actually use those words in context and have it inspire people. And so it's not like you can never use those words. It's just even the word stigma has a stigma, right? Relapse can be a part of somebody's story that you can inspire other people. And so it's okay to include relapse if it's getting on the subject of recovery. Remember, you're there to talk about recovery. The words recovering and recovered, people hear that differently. Not even everybody in the recovery community like agrees on those words. And so I always think of recovery as a process. And so, you know, I've been in recovery for 16 years and it's ongoing. You know, there's more to my story that to find out and discover and tell. And so think about language. Does anybody have any questions about that slide there?
What would you say? Okay, so say you're in public policy, moving into speaking with legislators, that type of stuff, and they use the word consumer. Like that's what they're in behavioral health. Everybody that comes to them through them, they use the word consumer. What, how do you go about that?
You say the recovery community, people in recovery. You can, you know, like combat that in a way that you want to use person-centered language that humanizes people. Like I'm not a consumer. It's like, and clients and patients bothers me too. Like patients are for doctors and clients are for lawyers, right? I'm not either of those things, right? And so, you know, it's person-centered language, person-centered alternatives to this. You're humanizing this. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Cool. Yeah, the word clients and the word patient, like I get that if you're like physically in a medical facility, but when you're out of that facility and in the community, I'm not a patient anymore. I'm not a client anymore. I'm not a consumer of any of that, right? You're a person in recovery. I see some chat boxes here. There you go. I call them my girls at work. Yeah, that's cool. There's no stigma in calling people your girls.
Aaron,
Yeah.
was I not paying attention when you were discussing? So if we're not clean, if we're not sober, we're not abstinent, what are we?
A person in recovery.
Okay, that's
right.
all. But people
Yeah, I
want to
mean,
know. People want to know sometimes how long you have been in recovery. So we'll just say I've been in recovery since blah
yep.
blah blah.
Yep.
Okay.
You know, you're a person, you know, the core of that slide there. I'm not sure if you came on late, but that one that we practice with, we say, you know, I'm Aaron, I'm a person in long-term recovery, and that means I haven't had a drink or a drug since September 6th, 2003. And boom,
Okay,
you're like
sorry.
already talking about recovery. If I'm like, I'm Aaron, I'm an addict, and I used to be a junkie, and I was like a client, a patient, and a consumer, and you know, it's like people are like, you're gonna get caught in the addiction story, and it's not what it's about. It's like, how do you get back to the recovery story? The stuff that inspires hope in others.
Right.
All
Thank
right.
you. I had an important phone call.
Okay.
That's why I missed.
Oh, good. Yep. Let's see here. All right. Thank you guys for asking your questions out loud and in the chat box. I'm almost through the training here. just what's not in the messaging training and why. We covered those first two. Why we don't say I'm an addict or an alcoholic. Again, if you use that, people think you're still using or still drinking. That's not the case for a lot of us. Not putting information about a 12-step program or examples of membership in AA, NA, or Al-Anon. That's not in the message. That fourth one there, addiction is a disease. And so for a lot of us, I share that belief. We share that belief that addiction might be a disease, right? And so think about this in terms of who the messenger is. Like, is the person in recovery the best messenger for that? Or is it like a doctor or a neuroscientist that can talk about it, or somebody from the American Medical Association or the National Institute for Drug Use, right? Like, those are all better messengers. And so it's not that you don't believe addiction is a disease. It's just that if you start talking about addiction as a disease, and the person that you're talking to like doesn't believe that it's a disease, then all of a sudden you're caught in this 20-30 minute conversation of whether addiction is a disease or not, and you totally ignored the recovery story, the reason why you're speaking out in recovery. And so if your organization believes addiction is a disease, cool, like let them do some messaging around that. But when you're thinking about it in terms of the messenger, if the person in recovery, it's important to not have that be a part of your story, because you just get caught up in talking about addiction, and you're there to talk about recovery, to deliver your recovery story. That last one, a definition of recovery, and this goes to that that comment about abstinent too. Yes, a majority of people in recovery identify with an abstinence-based recovery. However, there are other people that do not. All right. And, who are we to say that that person's not in recovery or not? I have people that used to shoot up heroin every day, and they don't anymore. And sometimes they smoke some pot, and they identify as people in recovery. Who am I to say that person's not in recovery from heroin addiction? Right. And so just think about that. Again, a lot of this can be about looking at our own biases. Emily, you raised your hand. You want to chime in or ask a question?
I just wanted to say one thing. I actually learned from the recovery coach book and Joanna, people are in recovery if and when they say they are. So you got to believe them.
Yep. I am big on those 6 words in peer coaching, meeting people where they're at. Those 6 words like that. Like if somebody's like, yeah, I'm in recovery, and I don't think that they are, who am I to say anything about it? Not my place, right? Recovery, you have a question?
Yeah, we deal with that a lot here over the MAT program.
Yep.
A lot of people, some people have the opinion they're not clean or in sobriety or in recovery, and I mean, who are we to say one way or another?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I'd love to share about that. But yeah, that comes up a lot. Somebody in my early recovery was on medication assisted recovery, and that person saved my life, or helped save my life. It's like I don't care how that you know what I mean, like how that person recovers. Like he's still helping people, he's on his own path, right? And so thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that addition.
And I would like to hit on something you actually just said it. There's so many people in West Virginia that when you say MAT, they're not even familiar enough with it yet, but you just said what I was getting to, medication assisted recovery. Like that is the new, like that's what we're moving towards. We don't want to call it medication assisted treatment. We want to call it medication assisted recovery.
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of people still that's stuck on that, but that's something that we're definitely working towards educating people on.
Yep. That's important. And think about that. I mean, the one thing that's really important to remember is like there's a huge difference between treatment and recovery. Like a lot of people lump those two things together. It's not the same thing. Like I said, I never been in a treatment facility in my life. I mean, as a patient, but I mean, I visited them before, but I'm saying like it's not part of my recovery story. People recover in their communities, right? When they go back to their communities. And so making sure that there's recovery support services in those communities that everybody can access, no matter how you came into recovery, no matter where you grew up, it's important to advocate to those services there. All right. A lot of good comments. I appreciate that. Um, Moving on
Can
here.
I
Oh,
add
I
one
just put,
thing about? Can I
oh
add
yeah, go
one
ahead,
thing
Garrett.
about Matt real quick too? Because of this language training, it's like, who are we talking to, right? And that entire battle is only happening within our world, right? So like the outside world, who we want this message to get out to, they don't see this inside fight that we have with each other about this issue. And to somebody who has no, direct contact with recovery, they see a medication, they see somebody helping and improving their lives on it. So it's like labeling it and doing that, that's an inner battle that we're having, and we don't need to be. Like, we should all be working together towards like mass solutions to get the like message out to the masses. Otherwise we're still just talking to each other in this echo chamber. Like,
Right.
anyway,
Yep.
just throw that in there.
No, that's perfect. I appreciate that. Right. And so that's why there's not like a definition of recovery like the in the story, because it's like the definition of what you say recovery is might differ from somebody else that's listening to it, right? Next slide. Let me go back here. Words and concepts that you can elevate in your story. Somebody had asked, well, what do you say in the alternative? Well, here's some words that can help you. Recovery community, communities of recovery, advocacy, sustainability, recovery coaching, support services, living proof, right? Somebody used lived experience before. That's great too. I should add that to this list. Living proof is another one that people hear really well. Story, responsibility, gratitude, service. Like, people, there's this cornerstone of recovery that people give back. You're of service. There are things that you're grateful of. You can share that in your story, right? So you can elevate these things here. When can I use the message? You can talk to your family members, friends, and neighbors. I have family members that are in recovery. I have family members that are not in recovery. I use this language training with all of them. If you write, if you do articles or blogs or newsletters, you can use this messaging there. And again, you can use it in like comment sections of newspaper articles online. When talking to elected officials, public policymakers, and other government, that's really important. I used to live in Rhode Island, and we used this language training for years and years and years and years and years. And after time, our elected officials were talking about our community with this language. They were referring to us as people in recovery, people in long-term recovery. And the difference is night and day. Like when a mayor or a governor uses this language on like in a state of the state address or in a press conference, that helps our cause, right? And so if you have friends that speak out all the time, and some of us even know like public faces, like celebrities or something, that speak out, and like half the time when celebrities speak out, I'm like, oh my god, stop talking. And the other half, and all they need is just like a little bit of like language training to like help that cause. But so if you know people that love speaking out and do media stuff, and maybe they're using some words that they don't think is harming, and it's not their intention to like make things worse. It's just like, this is how we've been talking for a long time, and so making sure that we can help others see why some of this new language can be helpful to them. If you're ever being interviewed, yep, go ahead, Garrett.
I just wanted to add one quick story. I took this early on, I was just introduced to this early on in my recovery, and we were working on getting a piece of legislation passed in our state, and a friend of ours had a personal relationship with a former congressperson, and this guy, although he was retired, he had incredible weight with like active members of the legislators, and he agreed to meet with us. And so he met with us, and we used our language that we had learned. And when I talk to elected officials, I always add in my story, like, I'm also a registered voter, I'm a taxpayer, you know, all of that possible because of recovery. And he stopped us like midway through, and he said to our friend, he's like, I thought you told me we were meeting with 2 heroin addicts. And like, that's how our friend had portrayed us. Like, these two, he's like, I literally thought I was meeting with 2 active heroin users. I know one personally. They have track marks. They're homeless. Like, and we ended up getting an ally based on like showing up, using positive language, talking about recovery. And then he used the messaging that we were using and ended up working with us to pass legislation in the state. So like, how incredibly effective this is, like, it's an understatement of like how the perception can change people that had no, like, only his one interaction with a heroin addict was a very negative like, he knew this person as a family friend who stole from the family and did all the things people, you know, in active addiction. But meeting with 2 people that were in recovery and advocating for others, like, it changed his entire perception. He's been an ally ever since. So I just wanted to throw that little personal story in there, that it really substantial.
I've met with elected officials, and at the end they're like, you don't look like a drug addict. I'm just like, what does that even mean? Like, let me, you know, like, use opportunities like that to really help change the stigma, to
That's
really
almost
address that. Yeah.
That's almost one of my favorite things, is when someone's like, that doesn't know me from before, is like, there's no way that you used to be a drug addict. Like, why would you make that up? You just here just to do this. Can you go back to, let me see, where it talks about the words that you can use to elevate? Yes, those ones. Thank you. Wait. Yes, those ones.
I'm gonna give people a resource where you can go find all this stuff online too. Right at the end here, I think it's the last slide. Are you good with this phrase? Are you good with this screen, Joanne, or do you want to?
The Recovery U people had missed it.
Hey, Joanna, I'll email you after this a folder that will have this PowerPoint training in it, so you can send it off to people if they need to review on their own.
Great, and the recording also, because there's some people.
Link.
Awesome.
And then let's see here. Oh, this is the last one I wanted to really put out there. Here's some really good addiction language resources. We have 2 how-to manuals on our website. That's at recoveryvoices.com. The first how-to is how to effectively speak out as a recovery advocate. This is, if you go to the website, there's an advocacy guide. You just click on advocacy guide. The one that's titled Effectively Speak Out as a Recovery Advocate has a lot of this stuff. It's in there. If we went through it in the training, it's in there. And then there's another one, how to effectively deliver public testimony. There's a lot of people that they're like, want to testify for a bill, and they're like, all right, you have 3 minutes. Well, it's like, how do you say what you want to say in 3 minutes? Like, it's right there. You know, if somebody's like, you have 3 minutes or 5 minutes to testify, how do you do that? Well, here's a guide to do that. And so if you can point other people to these resources as well, it is really helpful. And then there's the williamwhite.com that has a lot of, it's williamwhitepapers.com, actually. I think I need to change that. And again, this was originally done by Faces and Voices of Recovery. We always want to put that front and center to let people know this was drafted a while ago. And then Joanna says she'll make sure everybody gets the slides. Yeah, a lot of things on this presentation are on that how-to manual. So I'm going to open it up if you guys have any lingering sort of questions. Again, this is normally like a 6-hour training that we just did in a way less time than that. And so I'll just stay on for a little bit. You don't feel like you have to be obligated to stay on if you have to go out somewhere else. But I just want to make sure that myself and Garrett and Joanna are here for a while to answer any sort of questions that people might have. I do want to show you these 2 things. You can still see my screen, right? Yeah. These are both on that how-to manual as well. there's a recovery dialects image. A friend of ours did some research on this of when to use different phrases, whether you're using it in meetings or in public or with clients or with journalists. It tells you when or when not to use certain phrases. So that's really helpful. And then also this one is really helpful too. This image is on recoveryvoices.com. In that how-to, here's some, it says recovery dialects, the words we use matter. On the left side are some positive words. On the right side are some negative words. And so just make sure that, so if you need something to send somebody, that stuff's pretty handy if they like things that like have lots of colors and look flashy. I'm gonna stop sharing the screen and just kind of go into grid mode here. Does anybody have any questions, or is there anything that's unclear? Are you stuck on your story somewhere? And again, if
Aaron,
you don't feel like you got to stay, if you need to go, we'll stick around.
Aaron, there was some talk in the chat about identifying in meetings as an addict or alcoholic, and just doing that and I think maybe Aaron could just go a little bit into it, but it's really not to change your language when you're identifying it as your, in your personal recovery program. When I'm not saying which one, but I'm a member of a 12-step fellowship, and I identify with traditions that they allow me to, but outside of those rooms and outside of this world, and to change public perception, I don't use that language. And that's just my personal, thing, but that's, and then I said somebody, I wish I could identify in a meeting as a person in recovery. I do. I'll say, and sometimes I'll say I'm a person in recovery from addiction. And that's just, I've never gotten any slack from it. So I'm just saying, so I respect it. I'll do it, addict, alcoholic, or whichever where I'm at. But anyway, but my point is, this isn't for your personal recovery meetings.
Right. Yep. Outside the meetings. That's right, Jessica. Yep. All right. Recovery youth.
Yeah, I got a question. All right, so when I was doing my little testimony thing, I had mentioned that ex-convict kind of thing in there, and I guess that does carry a stigma with it. However, I was wondering with my, I was just released from incarceration April 8th. So I'm still, considered fairly new release from incarceration. And there's a lot of people that, I'm trying to advocate for that's currently in incarceration that, have similar issues, whether it's lifestyle issues or recovery issues. Already trying to get out of using the word addiction, but what should I delineate between the two kind of groups, I guess, for lack of a better term at this point? Or can I still use the fact that, because there's a lot of people that are incarcerated currently that have recovery issues, and there's not really a lot of programs or things being done to help them, and then they're getting released and they're having hard trouble finding help. So should I separate the two issues, like helping people being released from incarceration and then those in recovery, or can I, because of it being kind of a duality, can I use both?
I think you absolutely can use both. That's the beauty of your story. You're in a position to talk about a population that needs recovery support services while they're incarcerated and upon reentry into their communities. I think that both, not everybody can authentically tell that story or deliver that message, and you absolutely have a powerful story that you can share, and I would put it together. If that, Garrett, did you want to comment on that too?
No, I completely agree with you. I was trying to think of I know that there's been some, because you brought up the point about using stigmatizing language, but I don't think anything you said was stigmatizing because it's your story, right? Like you were talking about your personal experience. And, you know, if it was me, you know, I've used before, because I've personally, you know, I have a criminal record, and I use before, like, I'm a formerly incarcerated person. You know, I always try to stay with that
Right.
person-centered language.
I think
And I was
that,
telling Aaron, isn't there a proper? I don't know the language.
well, I think after you had told your story earlier, I think somebody in the chat box has said the word ex-con it sounds stigmatizing, right? And so to say formerly incarcerated, I think that changes that. Like, I mean, it's like, I think I personally think that sounds better in terms of how it comes off.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, and also at the end of your message, you know, like because you were talking about what you were doing, and so I think you said that perfectly, because like what that experience has allowed you to do is now advocate for people who are going through what you did. So it's just a matter of kind of just, if you think in your mind that ex-con may sound stigmatizing, like try to just tweak the words a little bit. And it's always also like who you're talking to. So if you're addressing like a mass crowd of state legislators and government officials, you might want to say, I'm a formerly incarcerated person and this is why this is important to me. But you know, if you're talking to, maybe you're bringing the message into some, you know, a group in jail, you might change that a little bit. So it's really like what you see as, try to put yourself in somebody else's shoes who are outside of our world, right? And how they hear it. You know, I don't, you know, if I talk to my mom, if I said to her, like, I'm an addict, she'd be like, oh my God, you're using again? Like, and she doesn't, you know what I mean? Like, so it's just kind of like thinking about who you're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want to say the importance. Thank you guys, everyone, for coming and joining. We are going to be, well, something I hope that all of us are going to be doing is effectively speaking out in our recovery advocacy, because we do have some things coming up with public policy and with legislatures and some bills. And I have everyone's email. Everyone has my email. We're going to be starting very soon about putting people as organizers onto the website. There's been people from all across the state on this call today, and I'm excited to work with everyone.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're going to work with Joanne to, you know, we want to create more opportunities to hear from people about what the experience is in your community. We've done listening sessions in a lot of the other states. We're going to talk to Joanne about like next steps, but we're going to figure out ways to learn from you all about what's happening in your communities and your experiences. So that way we can kind of assist in guiding you in some of the solutions, whether they're community or legislative. Thank you, everybody. This was fantastic. I hope it's a beginning for a lot of you, or a refresher for some as well. I put my email in the chat box if people want to contact me further, and we'll get people and reach out to Joanna if you want the PowerPoint or but it's a lot of this stuff is at recoveryvoices.com. All right. Thank you, West Virginia.
Yes.
Bye, everyone. You're welcome.